All right, Ryan, what's on your radar today?
Well, let's talk about Joe Manchin. Is he a lost cause? Is everything done for? Maybe. I don't know. Probably. He sure seems like it. But what's odd is that if you spend your time in Republican circles, you'd come up with an entirely different impression. That doesn't mean one is definitely wrong and the other is definitely right. It just means that we don't really know how this is going to go. We can have a pretty strong suspicion of how it's going, but we can't be absolutely certain. And as long as we're not certain, that means there's time on the clock, and Democrats can't let up on Manchin. If they need to find some hope, they can ask Republicans how they're feeling. Yesterday on this program, Rachel Bovard made the point that she simply doesn't trust that Manchin is going to stick by his pledge to oppose reforming the filibuster or passing democracy reform.
My read on Joe Manchin has always been that he takes these positions, but has a hard time seeing them through. So, I look at his commitment to preserve the filibuster as maybe half true. I think if pressure becomes immense, he'll find an out, whether it is, a niche opening for removing the filibuster when it comes to voting bills, or, reducing the threshold, keeping the filibuster in place, but reducing it from 60 votes to 55 or something like that. I don't see Joe Manchin as the bulwark that's going to really stand between his party and something of this magnitude. Happy to be proven wrong, but in years of observing Joe Manchin, I haven't really seen that kind of fortitude.
And she has lots of company on the right. This week, I put the question to a bunch of different Republican senators, and they mostly all said the same thing. They think he's up for grabs. That matters especially now that infrastructure talks between Shelley Moore Capito, Manchin's West Virginia colleague, and the White House have broken off. Here's how Tim Scott put it to me.
I think I appreciated his comments and thought that was a strong, smart move for the country. And I hope that he continues to have that approach to S1 as well as to the filibuster.
You don't think this is over?
Do you think it's over?
You think it's over? Manchin kicked off this fury with an op-ed in the Charleston Gazette-Mail this weekend promising to oppose ending the filibuster or passing the For the People Act. This comes after an intense lobbying campaign from the Kochs. On Tuesday, civil rights leaders met with Manchin to try to persuade him to abandon his opposition. Chuck Schumer told reporters that negotiations with the West Virginia senator were ongoing and that changes are being looked at to placate Manchin. So S1 would ban gerrymandering and require states to set up independent redistricting commissions, expand the time and avenues people have to vote, and automatically register voters. It would effectively overturn the voter suppression bills Republican legislatures have raced to pass in the wake of the 2020 elections. Under current Senate rules set in 1975, any senator can object to moving forward on a bill, and the majority needs 60 votes to overcome the objection. In 2013, Senate Democrats reformed the rules to allow nominees below the Supreme Court level to be approved with just a majority vote. In 2017, Senate Republicans again reformed the rules, this time allowing the 50-vote threshold to apply to Supreme Court nominees as well. Democrats in the Senate are now pushing to move all legislation to a 50-vote threshold or require the minority to actually talk on the Senate floor in order to stall legislation. And that's the move that Manchin is standing in the way of. The smart bet in politics is always to put your money on Democrats failing. If you're gambling, go ahead and do that. But this isn't a sporting event where we're all watching. All of you are players, and it's too early to quit. As Tim Scott said, it's not over till it's done. Democrats have done a good job throwing carrots at Manchin. They even put his wife on an Appalachian board in charge of distributing federal money. No, seriously, they did that. What Democrats have been lacking is the stick. In Washington, the conventional wisdom is that there really aren't any sticks Democrats can swing at Manchin because he's elected in West Virginia, and Democrats attacking him only make him more popular back home. That part's true, but there is actually a way to get Manchin's attention. For all his talk about wanting to save the Senate, Manchin constantly tells his colleagues and anybody else who will listen that he hates the place. And what he really loved was being governor of West Virginia. The current governor, Jim Justice, a rival of Manchin's, is termed out in 2024, and there's every reason to believe that Manchin's dream is to run for the governor's mansion again and win it. Justice was elected as a Democrat but switched to become a Republican. In 2020, he won in a landslide by 34 points, but his hapless nobody of a Democratic opponent still got 30.8% of the vote. So let's do some math, and I even have some props here to help you walk through this. So that amounted to 200 237,024 votes. 237,000. So, Emily, hold on to this one because we're going to need that in a minute. So Paula Jean Swearingen, a populist progressive running for Senate, lost by more than 40 points, but still got 210,000 votes. So that's about how many true blue progressive Democratic votes there are to be had in West Virginia. To win a bare majority in a 2024 general election for governor, based on that turnout, Manchin would need about 367,000 votes. Here it is. He needs 367,000 votes. Justice, in his landslide, got 500,000 votes. So to win, Manchin would need to peel off about 26% of those votes. So how many is that? 26%, 500,000. That's about 125,000 votes. So what does he need to do? He needs to combine these 125,000 votes that Justice got with, thank you, Emily, with these 237,000 Democratic votes. That gets him to the total that he needs to win. Now, in 2018, according to exit polls, Manchin won 17% of Republican votes, and he won 50% of independents. But to make it possible in 2024, he needs those 237,000 people who voted for the generic Democratic candidate for governor to be willing to come out and vote for him. See where I'm going with this? He doesn't have any room for error. He has taken progressive Democrats in West Virginia for granted for years. And in 2024, he'll really need them. So in 2018, Manchin won by less than 20,000 votes. That means that if just 10% of the Democratic base in West Virginia casts no vote in the gubernatorial election or cast a protest vote for a third-party candidate, Manchin could lose the general election to a Republican, even if he does well with his coveted independents and Republicans. So here's the big question. Are there 25,000 or roughly progressive populists in West Virginia who might be angry enough at Manchin to stay home if he runs for governor? Put it this way, in 2020, a slate of populists ran under the banner of West Virginia Can't Wait. Their leader, Stephen Smith, lost the gubernatorial primary, but he still won 65,000 votes. So if he or Paula Jean Swearingen or Richard Ojeda ran for governor as a third party, and if they had national grassroots money behind them, angry people from across the country pumping in money to punish Manchin, they could easily pull enough of those 65,000 votes their way to cost Manchin the election. Would West Virginia progressives do that and saddle themselves with a Republican governor? Some most certainly would, just to pay Manchin back. That doesn't even count all the Washington, D.C. liberals who've become pandemic transplants in West Virginia and would be happy to cast a spite vote against Manchin, since they have no roots in the state anyway. And besides, it's not like West Virginians don't know how to suffer through a Republican governor. Joe Manchin is ignoring his biggest risk back home, and Democrats in Washington are missing their biggest weapon. They're sitting right there in brew pubs and coffee shops from Morgantown to Hinton. If Joe Manchin does everything he can to bring Republicans to the table, but they still just won't play ball, West Virginians will reward him for changing the rules to make the Senate work. But if he just gives up and blocks the Democratic agenda just to keep the filibuster in place, he might be in for a shock when he comes looking for those Democratic votes for governor. Never underestimate the power of spite and vengeance. So, Emily, I think of this as both sort of a threat that Democrats could make, but also kind of a promise. So structurally, Democrats could try to organize something like this if they wanted to. You can find these 65,000 progressives on Facebook. You could target them with ads if you wanted to. But structurally, they exist as a progressive base in West Virginia, and they have their own minds. So whether or not national Democrats try to intervene to screw Manchin in 2024, if he does run for governor, a bunch of those Democrats could be so mad at Manchin that they're like, you know what, I'm not going out and voting for this guy, because you have to think of the context at that point. At this point, Republicans probably control the Senate and the House, and Democrats will blame Joe Manchin for that.
You know, Ryan, I was curious when you asked if there were any markers available on our editorial call this morning, but I'm so glad that
I did find some markers.
The markers were located, they were color coordinated, and it turned out perfectly. I actually think your math and props make it very clear. You put something into perspective that is very important. Manchin is easily defeated in a gubernatorial race, and that, as your math illustrated, is thanks to the sort of small but mighty progressive movement that exists in West Virginia. And on top of that, the fact that this is actually a blue bastion, a long-time blue state that has recently flipped, still has, you know, that chunk of Democrats, has a small but mighty progressive movement. That does, as you say, this is the perfect word, that's a stick. That gives Democrats a stick to use when it comes to Manchin. And I am sort of curious to know whether they have thought of it in those terms. It seems as though they haven't, and what we know in the public reporting about how they've been negotiating with Manchin, but he wants that job, and he could easily lose that job, either via a third party, via all this money pouring in, any combination of those numbers. It's pretty easy to get to for opponents of Manchin. Right,
so I haven't heard any talk about this, and I think it's because as a state becomes increasingly partisan, the minority voters, and by minority I means the ones who lose, become invisible.
Right.
And so we forget that there actually are 237,000 Democrats who voted in the last gubernatorial general election for a Democrat who got crushed by 35 points. But 237,000 is not zero.
And I think you said 210 for Paula Jean.
So Paula Jean in that exactly. Paula Jean in that same race against Shelley Moore Capito lost by about 45 points or so, but she still picked up 210,000 votes.
Right.
So that's 210,000 people that you can target. Now, like I had said, you're not going to get all of those, because a lot of those vote for the Democrat for different reasons. Some traditional are always going to vote Democrat till the day they die. But the 65,000 who voted for Stephen Smith on the West Virginia Can't Wait kind of ballot line in that primary, those are serious progressive populists, and they are now organized because this was a statewide movement that ran candidates up and down the ballot. So that the West Virginia Can't Wait movement knows who those people are.
Yeah, and you just used the word that we would be remiss if we didn't use, and that's populism, right? These are not just establishment Democratic candidates. People like Paula Jean Swearingen and Richard Ojeda, like those are good populist candidates that create contrast, that can get that progressive money pouring into West Virginia, can energize the small but mighty progressive base to start cobbling together a coalition that could defeat Manchin. And the cost-benefit analysis for national Democrats is really interesting. Would you rather have a red state run by a Republican governor? Would you rather push through your Democratic agenda right now before that seat in the Senate turns red forever?
They've never shown any interest in caring about West Virginia to begin with, so this is a threat they could actually carry out on. So if Joe Manchin wants that Democratic base to come out for him in 2024, he's going to have to help Democrats get their agenda accomplished. If not, he's going to have to spend too much time wooing Democrats, which then will hurt him with Republicans and independents, narrows his path to the point that he can't squeeze through.
Well, thank God for these markers.
You got it. So, Emily, looking forward to seeing what's on your radar.